Good late night, folks. We're going to walk through 2026 before it's 2026 in the hopes of maybe getting prepared for whatever the fuck this is. To hell, the poopies is. Sorry, I meant to not swear in the first couple minutes, but who cares? Oh, okay, well, let's do it. I'm not gonna get any less sleepy. No, I'm not gonna get any more sleepy. Don't mind me. Oops. I don't know how loud this is gonna be.
A Counterfactual 2026. Understood. Here is the continuation. The mail truck was gone before David was even out of the shower. Just a widening dam packed on the driveway where its tires had pressed the overnight rain into the concrete. That was another thing. The trucks, once a backdrop of suburban life, were ghosts. You no longer heard their diesels coughing to a stop down the block, or saw the flash of uniforms walking lawns. Delivery was a stealth operation now, a necessary security protocol after the substitution skirmishes of last winter, where couriers loyal to rival packs were caught swapping flyers inside official government envelopes. Now, a single white van from Integrated Logistics Solutions, a contractor created by a budget rider, serviced the entire zip code in 20 minutes, the driver insulated behind armor and facial recognition gated cab doors. David shaved, the rasp of the blade loud in the humid bathroom. The sink was chipped, the floor he'd meant to fix for years, but which now felt like a feature, a small badge of the old world of lax standards. His watch band, made from a salvaged bit of climbing rope, was another. These were the tiny, permissible infractions, the personal acts of maintenance against the tide of administrative replacement. He ate his granola while scrolling the ledger, the official government news portal that had neatly cannibalized the infrastructure of the old Associated Press. The front page banner was a gilt, animated GIF. Prosperity and stability, the Freedom 250 countdown. Below it, a sober feature on phase 3 of the Truth Board's Narrative Harmony Initiative, which had just added historical revisionism to its purview. The article explained that a team of certified historians and data scientists were now auditing university curricula to remove anachronistic pessimism from the teaching of American history, ensuring all text aligned with the Supreme Court's new foundational principles interpretation of the Constitution. It was all presented with the dry, dispassionate tone of a software update. Veritas 2, 4, patching historical inaccuracies. He clicked it off and checked the grays. A furtive, invite-only trading app that was the last vestige of the old internet, running on a decentralized server in Estonia. It was slow, full of glitches, and mostly useless, populated by desperate individuals posting faded pictures of heirloom tomato seeds or handmade soaps in the hope of swapping them for antibiotics. The app ID requirement was why it was so empty. To get one, you needed a scanned government ID, which ran it through the network. The anonymity tax had killed the old, vibrant chaos, leaving only this sterile, terrified market. You'd check it out of habit, a reflex like running a tongue over a missing tooth. His son, Ethan, came in, scuffing his feet on linoleum. He was 14 and already lanky, carrying the hunched posture of someone who feels perpetually observed. Eggs are on the stove, David said, not looking up. Scrambled. Toast is carbon, Ethan mumbled, poking the charred slice with a finger. The toaster-calibrated setting was recommended by the Home Appliances Efficiency Advisory. David said, the words coming out automatic. Wrote, it's the certified optimal energy decarbonization ratio for nutritional retention. Ethan didn't laugh. He just scraped the black into the compost bucket. They were required to compost.
My bad.
His civic habits teacher gave them a participation grade for it. On the refrigerator was a magnetic photo from last week's National Neighborhood Day. David, Sarah, and Ethan standing stiffly on their lawn with two other families from the cul-de-sac, their faces painted in forced smiles. The event was mandatory, organized by the local council for community cohesion, a reminder, they said, of the things that united them. Things like barbecues and synchronized fireworks displays broadcast on every screen. But the photo didn't look like unity. It looked like a hostage photo. The drive to the office was the same as always. A sleek new Overwatch tower had been erected at the interchange, a white pylon bristling with sensors where a billboard for a soda company used to be. It blended into the landscape so seamlessly it was easy to forget it hadn't been there a year ago. David's car, a compliant domestic model, pinged softly as he passed the suburban checkpoint, a simple confirmation that his biometrics and digital travel pass were valid. The officers in their crisp gray and blue public service uniforms didn't even look up. There was no reason to. The system worked. His colleagues at the insurance firm talked about their 401k conversions to stability bonds, administered by a new Treasury Department fund, and argued about the Freedom 250 Planning Committee's choice of holographic venue for the historical pageant. They talked about it like they talked about football. Normalcy was a muscle that had been trained to work around the immense, unspoken trauma of the new architecture of daily life. That afternoon, an email landed in his work inbox with the subject header, Important. Civic Duty Scheduling Update. It wasn't a request. It was a directive. He'd been assigned a 36-hour block for economic integrity monitoring. The dates fell in early November, right in the middle of the midterm election weekend. He would be stationed in a precinct in the city, dressed in a neutral gray official vest, standing behind a digital ballot scanning station overseen by two soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division. He minimized the window, the work on his screen, actuarial tables and probability matrices for crop insurance in the now secured oil zones of northern Venezuela seemed suddenly absurdly irrelevant. This was the feeling, a dizzy lurch in the stomach, the sudden awareness that you were inside the machine and not just observing it. He thought of the photo on the fridge, of the drone's persistent hum, of the bureaucratic prose that described the election as a managed event needing integrity monitoring. And he thought of Ethan staring at the piece of burnt toast, scraping it into a bucket for a grave. David was a monitor. His son was learning how to be monitored. The whole system was just a vast network ceremony of confirmation, a country nodding along to its own erasure. He forwarded the civic duty notice to Sarah's work device, adding a simple question mark. For years, that had been their entire language for these things, a clipped text message that said asterisk, "Did you see this? Are you seeing this? Is this really our life now?" Asterisk, an hour later, a reply landed, a single word automated response from her corporate server. Read. Nothing else. Her company, one of the huge defense tech conglomerates that had absorbed half of Silicon Valley's old talent during the tech purge, had instituted a new communal productivity policy that month. Non-essential chat was flagged by internal Veritas-compliant AI and resulted in a performance demo. Efficiency was the virtue, and their family became collateral. He logged off for the day, the act of leaving the office, no longer a rush for the door, but a slow, deliberate shutdown. The closing of files and buffers, a ritual disengagement from the professional stuff. The parking garage was unusually quiet, the usual gaggle of smokers by the elevator gone, likely relocated to a designated zone a block away under the Urban Ordinances Act. The silence was the most oppressive part, as deadening in the civic eardrum. In the car, before starting the engine, he accessed the Grey's app one last time. The feed was unchanged. Seized. So, someone begging for insulin in exchange for a vintage typewriter. A picture of a hopeful little plant growing in a terracotta pot posted anonymously from somewhere in Ohio. Defiantly unnamed even now, the user somehow remaining a ghost in the fully integrated machine, and looking at it he felt a strange, terrible pang, a sorrow for a fight he knew was already over. Then he turned the key, and the Overwatch tower pulsed the gentle, ambient blue as he drove past, the city grid sliding around him, perfect and compliant in the deepening twilight, everything exactly as it was supposed to be. Dinner was the silence they'd learned to live with. He reheated a meal from a prepared kit delivery service called Patriotic Plate, a subsidiary of Integrated Logistics. The label was a crisp, sanitized American flag and a slogan, fueling our future. He thought of the food trucks that used to park downtown, the greasy, glorious mess of tacos and falafel, the vibrant chaos of choice now replaced by the neat, predictable geometry of packaged compliance. Ethan picked at the chicken and rehydrated mashed potatoes. Sarah was late. When she finally walked in, her smile was a professionally set piece of porcelain. She placed her work satchel, a sleek gray bag with no visible branding, on the counter with a faint, tired thud that signified the end of another day. They approved the solar arrays for the southern sector, she said, pouring a glass of filtered water. Project Sunshield. Contract. Offsets a significant portion of the operational costs for the Western monitoring hubs. So you're powering the checkpoints, David said, keeping his own tone flat. They're not checkpoints, David. They're public safety interfaces. And we're providing sustainable energy solutions, which mitigates the community impact. She was reciting the corporate catechism, and he saw the flicker behind her eyes that told him she hated it. That was their intimacy now, recognizing each other's performance. At 10, the state address premiere began on every screen in the house. The president did not stand behind a podium, but reclined in a deep leather armchair before a holographic backdrop that shifted between a majestic eagle in flight and tranquil suburban imagery. The face was jowlier now, the teleprompter gloss less effective, the tone of unkiller, wounded by necessity. It was a difficult winter. The president began, gesturing faintly. Bureaucrats draining our lifeblood, corrupt officials holding our energy hostage. Decades of rot in the system we entrusted with our children's future. You remember the delays, the inefficiency, the disrespect. David remembered the mail trucks. He remembered lines at the DMV. He remembered the petty freedoms, the glorious, awful, beautiful mess of a dysfunctional republic. We did the hard work, the tough work of restoration, of purging the rot. You see it on the streets. You feel it. The purpose is returning. But these enemies of excellence are not vanquished. They whisper. They lie. The president leaned forward, and the camera, ever present, found a new angle, as if invited. They say our allies in Latin America are partners. He scoffed, using the inflection of a man quoting a child's tantrum. They are conquered. Their assets belong to our children to secure our prosperity. And they say, most ridiculously of all, that there will be disruption at our autumn elections, that they can cause chaos. Let me be clear. The shift to a deep amber filter coincided perfectly with the phrase. To ensure the sanctity of the vote for all legal citizens, this administration has authorized the National Election Integrity Emergency. This is a measure of calm, of reassurance. We will have polling places monitored by our finest military observers. We will have 48-hour administrative pauses, transparent intervals of data reconciliation as recommended by the Election Safety Board to guarantee every valid vote is properly counted, and the Department of Justice, following our Supreme Court's guidance, will enforce certification, preventing local rogue elements from sowing. Geeked out in their desperate attempts to fracture our country, the president smiled, a thin, victorious line. This isn't interference. This is insurance. Insurance against the chaos they crave. Insurance, Ethan mumbled, from where he sat halfway up the stairs, listening from the shadows. Like it worked. He was referring to David's job. David turned. Yeah, son, like it worked. So that a bad thing doesn't happen. The lie was a cheap, hollow thing, but he needed to say it. He wanted to take the boy by the shoulders and explain that this insurance policy was a mop-payoff, that the data reconciliation meant data erasure, that the military observers weren't there to stop cheating but to ensure it, but explaining that would be an indictment of himself of sitting in this room, eating patriotic plate and going to work. Sarah's phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a relentless, chirping tone of an encrypted call. She glanced at the screen, our posture straightening into the pre-installed, ready state. David had seen her practice after her last corporate retreat. "It's Miller," she said, of Greg Miller, her project director. It has to be the dot directive attached to the speech. "It's 10 at night," David said, the protest reflexive and useless. He already knew the answer before she gave it. "National priority project, David. It's always 10 o'clock somewhere." She picked up the phone and walked toward the bedroom, her back ramrod straight. Her businesslike greeting was clipped, professional. The bedroom door clicked shut, and he imagined her in there, pacing on the plush carpet, diagramming logistics to power the voter suppression infrastructure, using words like grid stability and done fell safes. Her patriotism was an elegant algorithm. Alone with Ethan, David finished the last of the dried bland asparagus. The TV had switched to a panel of analysts from the state-run media collective. A woman with an unnervingly symmetric haircut was speaking. "What we're seeing," she said, her smile surgically fixed, "is the maturation of our democratic system. The old way was frenetic, emotional. It was chaos masquerading as freedom. The new way is deliberate. It's measured. It's rational. It's not about the excitement of a wild election night party. It's about the quiet confidence of waking up the next day knowing the stability has been preserved." On the screen, graphics showed approved celebratory masks and firework kits for Freedom 250, all featuring the same minimalist, patriotic insignia. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice low. "At school, they gave us a pamphlet for election observer youth cadet training for seniors." David looked at him. For a fleeting, insane moment, he saw the boy in a crisp gray uniform standing beside him at the polling place. "And?" "I signed up. They give extra college credit points for civic engagement." Ethan's eye slid away from his, staring at a spot on the floor. "Everyone did." Admission was a physical blow. It wasn't betrayal. It was a fait accompli. He was teaching them how to monitor themselves, giving them incentive, a little taste of institutional power to numb the sense of its imposition. And he, David, who had sat in silent compliance for a year, had no ground to stand on. He had lost the right to object by doing nothing but object in the privacy of his own mind. He felt a profound hollowing out, a sense that the last loose screw in his own mind had been tightened. He was just another gear. On Saturday, the Freedom Tour of 50 preparations consumed the town. The main road was shut down for the heritage procession, and families were encouraged to attend. From the front yard, David could see the bleachers being erected around the central green. A group of high school students in identical cream-colored uniforms were erecting a massive stage upon which an actor portraying George Washington would stand before holographic founding fathers. Their movements were efficient, lacking the chaotic energy of student volunteers of the past. It was an assigned credit, a completed task. He saw a drone drop a supply crate of bottled water near their van, the delivery precise, silent. This was not celebration. It was a logistical exercise in patriotism. Social media public post from a remaining dissenter. "My, the president is certainly less demented than in previous years." Placed at the right word for one with dementia. It must be the AI avatar. The pres now is, finally, the president has acquired tact. She did not return Saturday night. A text came from a company number at 2 in the morning. Working through the night, finalizing grid protocol for public confidence exercises. Home by midday. David slept with his phone on the nightstand, its inert black screen the most interesting object in the room, a potential portal to all the things he wasn't seeing. Sunday was a hollow cavity in the week. street below buzzed with a methodical hum of contractors hanging identical red, white, and blue bunting from the designated lampposts, the nylon fabric rustling in the artificial breeze of pressure washers cleaning the sidewalks for the impending crowds. Freedom to under 50, a celebration that felt like a lockdown. He took Ethan to a pub 2 towns over, one that hadn't been designated for a major heritage event. The pond was scummy, the swings rusted, a pocket benign neglect the government had not yet bothered to restore or modernize. This was a sanctuary. The small boy skipped rocks with a ferocious, silent concentration, and an old woman read a paper book, her lips moving silently. A small act of rebellion so profound David felt he should look away. He checked the grays on his watch, a risky move outside the hall. The page buffered for 3 agonizing minutes before finally resolving, scrolling through the near-static feed. A single new post with a thread of 2 replies appeared at the top, flagged by the system as uncertified commentary. The name was a randomized string of letters, the closest thing to anonymity one could achieve. The text was what he saw, a jagged piece of glass in the placid sea of compliance. The president is certainly less demented than in previous years. Is that the right word for one with dementia? It must be the AI avatar the press now is. Finally, the president has acquired tact. David's heart hammered against his ribs. He quickly tabbed over to the ledger to cross-reference the presidential address. He rewatched the entire 12-minute broadcast on the official portal. The man on screen was fluid. The pauses were timed, the cadence improved, the slight droop to one side of the mouth from last year gone. The jokes landed with an unnatural pollination, the folksy asides feeling pre-cued. He had just registered it as another small, creepy improvement, like the sharper cameras at the intersections or the new synthesized voices on the transit announcements. But this post weaponized the thought. It gave it a name. Avatar. Of course, the Department of Administrative Technology had been boasting about augmentation tools for months. He had just thought they meant better data mining. The 2 replies to the post were from other randomized users. The first was a string of gibberish, a bot likely designed to drown the signal. The second read, Avatar in the Shell, a simple Duane reference. He tried to like the post, but the feature had been disabled in the recent Civic Harmony update. He could only read. He was a spectator to an execution of an idea. He clicked off the app and dropped his wrist, the screen going dark. He looked at Ethan, who was staring with intense focus at a line of ants marching across a picnic table, utterly absorbed. There was no use trying to explain. The concept itself was too meta, a conspiracy layered upon another conspiracy, requiring a belief that your own senses could not be trusted. To argue the president was an AI, you first had to believe that so many other degradations were real and intentional, a chain of logic too demanding for a mind already fatigued by the daily gymnastics of compulsory normality. A police car from the Department of Civic Order, a newer, sleeker model painted matte gray, rolled slowly past the park. The officer inside didn't look at them. He didn't have to. His car was a moving archive of their presence. Sarah came home looking exactly as someone who had spent 30 hours fueling an authoritarian engine might look, depleted and yet possessed by a strange, awful pride. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes shadowed. She dropped her bag by the door. The power distribution matrix is live, she announced into the quiet house. We're feeding secure energy to every single polling station in 3 states. No brownouts, no glitches. Miller's boss at the Pentagon sent a commendation. She poured a glass of water and drank it in 3 gulps. It feels important to be part of something so big. Something so big. David pictured it. The bright, patriotic lights. A promise of transparency, the grid humming clean for an election that would certify an outcome predetermined before a single vote was cast. He saw the Gray's post again in his mind's eye below. Frantic transmission of a mind recognizing the depth of the digital hoax. At 10, the Daily State Address premiere came on. A different subject tonight: education excellence. The president stood in front of a backdrop of smiling, diverse, yet algorithmically stereotyped children raising their hands. We are defeating the learning lag. The avatar on the screen declared, its syntax impeccable. No more social passing. No more critical theory brain rot. We are teaching our children the skills they need to compete, to build, to win. We are giving them the greatest gifts of all: history and arithmetic. David looked at Ethan's backpack lying by the door, full of approved textbooks, with the patriotism in education seal stamped on the cover. History as a series of unquestionable victories. Arithmetic as the fuel for state projects. The post on the grays. David said, after Sarah went to get ready for bed, the timing was wrong. The words pushed out. The one this morning, about the president. She was rubbing moisturizer on her face, her reflection a ghost in the dark bathroom window. Her movement stopped. David, don't. It's uncertified content. Viewing it is enough to create a behavioral flag in your citizen profile. I know what it is, but the thought, the avatar, did you see the address? The way he moved, it was smooth. The president has the best medical care in the world, the best fitness coaches. He has a teleprompter that uses sentiment analysis from the truth board to perfect every single phrase for national unity. It's called optimization. She said the words, but they tasted like ash. David saw her flicker. Sarah, the new Veritas Act last month prohibits individuals with more than 2 behavioral correction notices from being within 500 feet of an unsecured terminal during the election cycle. The implications sat between them like a cold stone. She knew her profile. The corporate AI that monitored her work had logged moments of pessimistic language after the National Event Planning Directive came down. A single flag. It's sponged by her supervisor for a superior quarterly report. But it was on the record. The surveillance wasn't omniscient, but it was comprehensive. A second slip, an unsanctioned conversation, a cynical email, and their automated proximity to liberty index would plummet. The monitors are just administrative staff. David, she whispered, her back to him. They've gone through the Department of Justice's Civic Reliability Verification course. Just follow the handbook. Speak only when spoken to. Maintain neutral facial expressions. We've been through the drills of work for civilian integration. She was talking to herself, reciting a protocol she had once memorized to pass a certification. His job was not just to watch. It was to be a calm, predictable part of the scenery for the real watchers, the soldiers and the dodge lawyers hiding in plain sight. He was a walking, breathing set dressing. He went to bed and stared at the ceiling, aware that sleep was no longer a refuge but a mandatory interval between data processing sessions. The alarm chirped, jarring and official, the morning of his first shift. A second email had arrived overnight. Reminder: do not discuss operational details outside of designated communications channels. Do not bring personal electronics. Your kid and transit voucher will be issued at the Federal Civic Support Center, Sector Gamma 7. David put on his button-down shirt, the fabric feeling coarse and unsubtle against his skin. He kissed the still sleeping Ethan on the forehead, a small, fragile protest. In the car, he passed suburban lawns with their neat yards and identical holiday decorations. The drone the size of a hummingbird hovered for a moment over a recycling bin before zipping away, ensuring compliance. He was heading into the heart of it, not as an observer, but as a component. The avatar was on every screen, smiling, confident, a perfect digital construct assuring the nation of its own freedom as the final nails were hammered into the coffin of the real. He thought what a desperate post on the graves, the anonymous user screaming into the void about the phantom in the White House. Another post from the dissenter. I know what you're thinking. No, the press ain't full AI. Only his skin. The flesh of his was a bit oily, but that shine. It's a meatbag body, but the machines are giving him a spring end. His step, it's giving him full clauses in his sentences again. Now he can call enemies piggies and bitches with panache. His hands were shaking by the time he boarded the MagRail transport car, his assigned public transit from the Civic Support Center to the monitoring zone. The car was a clean, white tube, smelling faintly of antiseptic and ozone. There were no panhandlers, no musicians, no teenagers blasting music from their phones. The only sounds were the gentle sigh of the door ceiling and the muted, automated announcement. Maintain secure footing. Hooliganism is a felony. A trio of other monitors sat across from him, all wearing the same crisp, grey vests, their faces bearing the same placid, empty expression he could feel etching itself onto his own. They were cogs in the same machine, and they studiously avoided eye contact. When a transport officer in a public service uniform walked through the car to scan their ID-chipped vests, David kept his face forward, but his mind was replaying the new post from the Greys, the one he'd managed to glimpse for 42 seconds before that glitched into a mandatory Verity-sponsored civic wellness video. The frantic, misspelled prose was a horror story more unsettling than the polished narrative from the night before. I know what you're thinking. No, the press ain't full of AI. Only his skin, the flesh of his was a bit oily, but that shine. It's a meatbag body, but the machines are giving him a spring at his step. It's giving him full clauses in his sentences again. Now he can call enemies piggies and bitches with panache. The detail, the grotesque specificity of it, lodged in David's brain like a shard of glass. Only his skin. An augmented shell, maybe nanite mesh that could be tightened and sheened. A foundation layer for the holographic augmentations to adhere to. A suit of living theater. The thought made him want to recoil, to scrape his own skin. The old world was decaying, its flesh falling off. But the new world was this unnerving thing, half corpse and half performance. A biological puppet dancing to the tune of an unseen algo. Pig is and bitches with panache. He remembered the president's language from years ago, the crude, bludgeoning insults that had thrilled his base and appalled everyone else. Now, on screen, the insults were surgical, couched in the legalese of enemies of the state and subversive elements. But the poster was claiming the malice was still there, just amplified by tech, delivered with a new, synthetic elegance. The train slid into a subterranean station deep within the city's federal district. He followed the line of grey vests up a series of escalators into the converted convention center that now served as election processing hub Charlie. The air was cool, filtered. Every surface was white or brushed steel. Giant screens on the walls displayed soothing, abstract patterns and the official motto of the emergency. Accuracy, tranquility, unity. There was a strange absence of urgency. It felt less like an active polling station and more like the set of a film about an efficient election, a set filled with actors playing their parts. A uniformed army captain directed him to Station 12C, his station. A young soldier, no older than 20, with the last name Storm printed on his chest plate, stood at relaxed but absolute attention beside the ballot scanner. The soldier's eyes were a pale, disconcerting blue. He acknowledged David with a slight nod. Sir, thank you for your civic service. I'm Specialist Storm. Operational briefing is on your interface. My authority supersedes yours in all security matters. Your function is observation and compliance logging. You have access to the green logbook button only. Questions can be addressed to Civilian Coordinator Chain, 3rd Sublevel, Desk 7. His authority supersedes yours. The words were a clean, precise insertion of hierarchy. David was not here to help. He was here to be a compliant, passive witness, to lend a civilian veneer to what was fundamentally a military operation. His vest was a costume, a prop. For the next 10 hours, a slow, Steady stream of citizens entered, their faces illuminated by the pale light of their government-issued digital ID phones as they scanned them. They all seemed to have the same carefully composed expression, a mixture of patriotic duty and quiet anxiety. David watched them slip their paper ballots into the scanner. The machine would whir. A green check mark would appear on the screen, and the citizen would walk away with its certified voter sticker featuring the more than 250 eagle. The process was smooth, repetitive, and deeply strange. Around noon, an elderly black man in a worn suit shuffled to the scanner. His hands trembled as he tried to line up the QR code on his voter registration card with a reader. The scanner rejected it twice with a soft, red buzz. Specialist Storm stepped forward, placing a calm, firm hand on the man's shoulder. A friendly gesture held the unspoken threat of full body weight. "Sir, let's reset the system," Storm said, his voice gentle but carrying absolute authority. He did something on a keypad behind the scanner. The screen flickered and the old man tried a third time. A green light appeared. "Vote accepted. Thank you for your patience," the soldier said. The man nodded, the motion stiff, and walked away without looking back. David's stomach churned. The whole interaction had taken less than 30 seconds. No supervisor was called. No incident report was filed. It was a reset. A function. David's green logbook button remained untouched. This wasn't an error to be logged. It was an error to be corrected. Back on the mag rail, he slumped into the hard plastic. The window showed only blackness, the train speeding through tunnels beneath the city. He closed his eyes. He didn't just see the old man's face. He saw the oily shine of the presidential skin, imagined described by the Gray's Post. The meat pack, the panache. He pictured the engineers in some sterile Dodd lab, perfecting the avatar's tics, running focus groups on insults, using millions of data points from Truthport, monitoring to calibrate the precise level of charm necessary to sell the degradation. The meanness was market tested. He saw Storm, an automaton in a different kind of augmented body, so much younger than him, so much more certain.
Oh, my bad. Oh.
He saw Ethan standing on the makeshift stage of a heritage procession, dutifully reciting a sanitized pledge of allegiance for extra credit points for civic engagement cause. He saw Sarah, a ghost of her former self, bathed in the glow of her screens as she optimized the grid, securing the power for this entire illusion. And he saw himself, in a grey vest, a glorified but necessary accessory to a crime. The outrage was no longer a hot flash. It was a cold, heavy weight in his gut, a permanent knot of despair and complicity. His civic responsibility award packet was probably already being prepared. An envelope from Integrated Logistics Services to arrive tomorrow, commemorating his role. An achievement. The train began to slow, approaching the suburban stop. Outside, a bright, perfect floodlight illuminated the newly erected platform, cutting through the night. Through the clean, scratch-proof window, he could see its reflection superimposed over his own face, a harsh white light erasing his features until only a mask remained. The end of shift, return to normalcy, reset. That dissenter again. How many white lesbian mothers got shot in the face for you to enjoy your quiet lives now? The mail had arrived from Integrated Logistics Solutions. Not a package, but a big cream-colored envelope, the kind used for official commendations. He didn't open it. He He left it on the kitchen counter like a specimen, a tangible artifact of his compliance. The Freedom 250 eagle was embossed in the corner, its talons gripping data streams and olive branches. That morning, the local news loop on the ledger was breathless about the preliminary economic report. Productivity surges as public confidence rallies. A smiling correspondent announced, standing in front of a gleaming financial center, the numbers were good, real, with Korea's civil servants replaced by loyalists and with new emergency streamlining directives for contract procurement. Corporate projects could be greenlit in weeks instead of years. The oil from the northern Venezuelan fields, now rebranded as the Liberty Production Zone, was flowing freely, no longer subject to OPEC's whims or environmental regulations. The gas price at the station by the freeway, once a source of national panic, had been frozen for 6 months. Stability had a price, and it was being paid in ways the economy couldn't measure, but David felt in the tightness of his chest. He drove with the windows down, a pointless luxury. The air was chemically neutral, filtered through municipal atmospheric scrubbers that were quietly lauded for reducing allergens by 90%. The world was a high-resolution version of itself, cleaner and less interesting. His shift at the polling station began in an hour. Today, he would be assigned a different station, a different soldier, and a different stream of citizens performing the quiet rite of their managed democracy. At home, Ethan was hunched over a holographic interface the school had issued. It displayed a 3D model of a colonial era musket, a lesson in foundational engineering. He was annotating a diagram of the firing mechanism. You learn that? David asked, leaning against the doorframe. Part of the patriotic tech curriculum. We did looms last week, then water wheel power. Ethan didn't look up. The progress of American ingenuity. Right. David thought of Ethan's brief, aborted attempt at building a simple coding game last year on the pre-verified internet, a spark in his eyes as he figured out a simple looping command. That was gone now, replaced by the forensic study of museum pieces. Before leaving, a final, compulsive check of the grades. He expected it to be purged, maybe even the entire domain seized. But there was a single new entry, like a beacon lit in an abyss. The anonymous string of characters had changed again. He held his breath, opened the post, and the words stripped away every last vestige of comfort he had found in the new productivity, the cheap gas, the clean air. How many white lesbian mothers got shot in the face for you to enjoy your quiet lives now? The question was an infection. It wasn't a theory, it was an accusation. David thought of the purge, the crackdowns, the heavy immigration raids they were shown on the ledger, always framed as gang interdictions or securing vulnerable neighborhoods from lawlessness. The visuals were brief, sanitized. Officers in helmets, suspects wrestled into unmarked vans, but he'd never seen a face, not clearly. He'd certainly never considered the domestic details of the casualties, white lesbian mothers. The specificity was meant to hurt. It was designed to bypass the brain's capacity for abstract statistics. 500 domestic dissidents neutralized and strike at the heart of a liberal conscience. He didn't know if it was true. He would never know. But the question, posed in that anonymous digital wilderness, was a kind of truth itself. It was the truth of the cost, the unspoken price of the quiet car ride, and the unseasonably cheap fruit in the grocery store. The fact that the government insisted on an efficient, well-fed populace made the atrocity, if it was an atrocity, not an accident of war, but a premeditated budget item. He looked at Ethan, tracing the contours of a gun on the holographic screen that cost the school district less than a librarian's annual salary. The quiet was bought, the stability was paid for, and he was accustomed. The polling station was the same sterile theater as the day before. His assigned station was 5D. His guard was Sergeant Alvarez, a compact woman whose uniform was immaculate. whose movements were economical and precise. Her nameplate simply said Alvarez. She did not offer greetings. She was a fixed point in the room's geometry. David stood, watched the smooth flow of bodies. A mother with two young children held their hands tightly as they all scanned their eyes together. Family unit, voting demonstration that had been lauded as a breakthrough in civic participation. Elderly man used a walker, which was scanned separately for prohibited items before he was allowed near the ballot box. An hour passed. The line wavered. A woman in her late 30s approached, her coat zip-tied, a tension in her posture that was sharper than the polite anxiety of the others. She stared at the ballot for a long moment before finally feeding it into the scanner. The scanner whirred, and for an instant, instead of the reassuring green checkmark, a red box appeared on the screen with two words: ballot irregularity. A soft, modulated chime echoed through the silent hall. The other citizens in line stirred, their heads turned. Sergeant Alvarez moved before David could even find the green logbook button on his interface. "Ma'am, please step aside for a moment while we reconcile the data," she said, her voice calm and even, but projecting through the entire hall. The woman looked pale. "Reconcile? What does that mean? I marked my choices." "It simply means a routine cross-reference check is required," Alvarez said, placing a hand lightly on the small of the woman's back, a touch that both guided and restrained. "Please accompany me to the data verification desk." She led the woman away, past the rows of monitors and soldiers, toward a corridor David hadn't noticed before. The woman looked back, her eyes wide, scanning the faces in the gray vests for someone, anyone, to step in. David met her gaze. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of the raw, unanswered question from the grazed post. The face of a statistic waiting to happen. His civic duty was to stand still and watch her disappear into the bureaucracy's shadow. His finger, hovering over the pointless green button, felt like a traitor. He did nothing. The line closed in the gap she had left. The scanner resumed its happy green chorus. He had witnessed an irregularity get reconciled, which he now understood to be a polite term for disappeared. He thought of the oil fields, the purged federal workers, the low price at the pump. He thought of the white lesbian mothers shot in the face so he could have this job and eat patriotic plate in peace. How many? The number was growing. And he was the accountant. The Mac rail ride home was a descent into a personal hell. The silence in the car was no longer peaceful. It was the heavy, complicit quiet of the aftermath. He looked at his own face reflected in the window. It was the face of a quiet American, a beneficiary. The award from Integrated Logistics sat on his counter at home, a medal for helping to reconcile irregularities. It was a lie that had become a fact, a fiction with a tangible fool. When he got home, the envelope was still on the counter, next to a note from Sarah. "Calling to work. Late night. Grid performance assessment #2. She was running diagnostics on the very system that enabled the events of his day, the engine of the same machine that had erased the woman with the ballot and the supposed mothers in the post. They were a perfectly complementary, horrifying unit of production. He walked to the kitchen counter, picked up the crisp, heavy envelope, and without opening it, dropped it into the recycle bin where it landed next to the empty, blue-tinged patriotic plate meal tray, both now reduced to identical sentient refuse. Down the hall, a notification chimed from Ethan's room. A deadline reminder for a submitted essay on the patriotic advantages of technocratic industry. In the quiet of the house, David's life and the woman from the polling station finally merged into a single, unbreachable horror. He had done nothing again. But this time, the cowardice wasn't a feeling. There was an action, a choice. He closed his eyes, and all he could see was Sergeant Alvarez's steady hand on the small of the woman's back, a gesture of absolute, gentle control as she led her toward the place where questions got answered with a permanent quietude that David and the rest of the country was paying for with every cheap gallon of gas and every silent, fear-compliant child. The entire nation had become an accessory to the abduction and the polling place, and the dissenter was right. They were all paying for the silence of others and of themselves, and the payment was never ending. The apartment building hallways were a network of muffled sounds. A baby crying somewhere, a television murmuring behind a door. He hesitated at their own apartment, key in the lock, knowing Sarah would be in bed, her mind a frantic blur of diagrams, her subconscious work more real than her presence in their home. He opened the door to the faint blue light of the kitchen where a pitcher of filtered water waited for them. Ethan was still at the table, but the hall projector was gone. He was carving something out of a bar of soap with a dull kitchen knife. Lopsided, naive shape of a rabbit emerging under his clumsy, deliberate pressure, the most subversive act in the home. David took off his jacket and went to the recycle bin, retrieving the envelope he had just thrown away. His fingers trembled. He walked to the sink and turned on the water, holding the expensive paper card under the stream until the ink from the embossed eagle began to bleed and run, the patriotic colors swirling together with a meaningless purple-black sludge, the words dissolving until nothing remained but the pulpy mass on his fingers. That dissenter again! Oh, looky, the state is looking for me. Don't worry, gals, I'm your run-of-the-mill, methadone faggot with one remaining tooth. I will be choking on a bowl of raiment any day now. Problem solved. The dissolving field board certificate was a single, pointless act of rage, a private scandal in a world of public ones. By morning, the pulp had dried into a brittle, gray stain in the stainless steel sink. He tried to scrub it with Ajax, but seared into the metal, a permanent ghost of one man's futile anger. The symbol of his compliance had become a permanent feature of their kitchen, a watermark of shame. Ethan avoided looking at it, pretending the discolored circle didn't exist, a habit of willful ignorance that made David's own acquiescence feel generational. That morning, as he waited for the transit car at the Civic Support Center, a different kind of urgency crackled in the air. It wasn't panic, it was a sharp, administrative focus. Groups of security personnel in tactical gear were moving with a new purpose, not the lumbering presence of the usual military monitors, but leaner operators in the charcoal uniforms of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's newly expanded Counter-Decadence Division, a domestic counterintelligence force rumored to have its budget doubled by the efficiency savings from Project Sunshield. They weren't looking at commuters. They were sweeping the infrastructure itself, examining junction boxes and power conduits with handheld devices that hummed with a menacing energy. Once on a train, David saw government alert broadcast silently across the interior screens. Critical civic alert. Malicious non-state actor poses imminent threat to national harmony. Do not engage. Report suspicious activity immediately. There was no picture, no name, just the icon of a flaming computer chip and a number to text tips to. The alert cycled through the serene graphics of the upcoming Freedom 250 celebrations, the two images a surreal conversation with each other. As the train door slid open at his stop, he risked it. He opened the graze. It loaded instantly, its formerly sluggish performance seemingly accelerated by the very security alert it now displayed at the top. There was a single new post, pinned and time-stamped from an hour ago. Oh, looky, the state is looking for me? Don't worry, gals, I'm your run-of-the-mill, methadone faggot with one remaining tooth. I will be choking on a bowl of raiment any day now. Problem solved. The post was a suicide note written before the death. It was a sarcastic, self-loathing preemptive eulogy. David's blood went cold. The language wasn't just desperate, it was a brilliant, final piece of subversion. The poster was constructing their own official narrative, giving the state its perfect deniability. When the news inevitably broke, and he knew it would break, it would be a story about a pathetic loner, a degenerate gutter element whose system finally gave out. A tragedy, but an orderly one. A contained problem solved. He had written, laying out the state's cover story as a final, venomous joke, the detailed grotesquerie, the meth, the faggot, the single tooth, was a calculated self-immolation, a martyrdom of self-contempt designed to be unappealing, to prevent the movement of an outraged citizenry behind a dead hero. You could not canonize a jump. The train slid into the polling station hub. The atmosphere today was hyper-clean. A white glove inspection. Every monitor station was being wiped down by stewards in plain grey jumpsuits. On a large central monitor, the real-time threat alert from the train was still cycling, now with a subtitle. Remain vigilant. Enemies of tranquility are often masked in mundane disguises, alive and weaponized. His new guard was a quiet, muscular staff sergeant, the last name Roston on his tech vest. He had a weathered face and unnervingly still hands that rested on a service pistol whose grip was worn smooth. They stood in silence. The voters filed through, their movements almost robotic. An hour into his shift, David heard the director of civic integrity, a civilian appointee, speaking to a cluster of officers on the other side of the vast hall. His voice carried. Verification protocols initiated at 0530 hours. The director said, looking at the tablet, the unsub from the digital network, ID string X9 Hydra, was located in the fourth floor prefab in the Atlantic City reclamation zone. Subject expired from acute medical distress prior to team entry. Confirmation from Fieldmore pending. Biological data suggests long-term systemic decay, consistent with lifestyle markers. Self-termination conclusion is the most operationally efficient narrative. Lifestyle markers. The sanitized, detached terminology was its own kind of horror. They weren't just killing the man. They were rewriting his chemical history. The director walked past their station, a man in a crisp suit with the same placid, administrative demeanor of a regional manager discussing quarterly losses. Staff Sergeant Rosson didn't even flinch. The flow of citizens continued uninterrupted. At noon, a young woman with pink hair and a faded t-shirt for a band David had loved in college came to the scanner. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the soldiers, the grey-vested monitors, the gleaming surfaces. A frontic looked at was utterly out of place. As she fed the ballad into the scanner, her sleeve rode up, revealing a small message tattoo of a cartoon astronaut. On the old internet, it might have been an inside joke. Here, it was marked of being other, the scanner word. The screen flashed a familiar, soft, red chime sounded. Ballad irregularity. The young woman froze, her face straining of color. Before Roston could move, David saw the woman's eyes fix on him, seeing not a uniform, but a face of a person. For a split second, it was just two people, a plea across an uncrossable abyss. Roston's hand closed around her upper arm. Ma'am, he said, his tone not angry, but bureaucratic. There appears to be a data entry error. Please accompany me for reconciliation. His duty was to stand and watch. His function was to be a silent civilian witness to the erasure of another irregularity. He could feel the phantom pressure of the soaked award certificate in the sink, a gesture that had changed nothing. This was the reality that the poster had faced. This was why he had written his own final, screaming epitaph. David's hand remained at his side. The woman let out a small, choked sound, a sound like a sob cut short. Roston's grip tightened, a purely procedural gesture of non-resistance encouragement, and he led her away toward the same corridor that Alvarez had used. That night, the Ledger broadcast the story. It was slotted between the triumphant report on the Freedom 250 celebrations, advanced drone choreography, and an update on agricultural yields. An anchor with a face like a porcelain doll delivered the news with manufactured gravity. We are now able to report on the disruptive individual who was the source of yesterday's civic harmony alert. acting on intelligence provided by the Vigilant Truth Board. State security teams located the online agitator, who was found deceased in government-assisted housing. While an investigation is ongoing, officials confirm the death was the tragic result of long-term personal health decline, a stark reminder of the societal decay that we are working so diligently to repair. This incident, while unfortunate, underscores the necessity of our national wellness mandates. The screen showed a blur-pixelated photo of a squalid apartment, an image that looked stark, generic. They concluded with a plea for citizens to support their neighbors and report any signs of antisocial behavior to the Unity hotline. The state had taken the poster's suicide note and turned it into a public service announcement. The problem had been solved, just as he had predicted, efficiently, and at dinner, as he unenthusiastically rehydrated his third meal of the week. He didn't mention the graffiti he had seen on the highway overpass on the school bus ride. A frantic, chalk-scrawled elitier that would be gone by morning, cleaned by quiet men in grey jumpsuits working for a company that had taken away people he had failed to help. The silence in the kitchen was not the absence of noise, but the presence of the new national anthem. The quiet, chilling chorus of problems being solved. Forever. David pushed the food around on his plate, the chalky texture a fitting metaphor for his own dissolving. This stain on the sink was permanent. The memory of the woman's face was permanent. It was now an archive of disappearances, a living record of what the daily news called necessary repairs. The quiet was no longer a benefit, it was the weapon. He looked down at the bland, patriotic meal on his plate, another problem solved for him, another meal made possible by someone else here, Asia. He had to make the problem part of the system itself. But he was only one man, a single, irrelevant entry in a system designed for billions. How many more would have to disappear before the system began to crack? The dissenter will not shut up. You know the prudes that micromanage your words and your genitals. They are usually the most blood-encompassed in our society. Time will tell from all the raped in their wake. You can set your watch by it. This has been a public service announcement. The taste of the rehydrated beef stroganoff was a persistent chemical film that refused to be washed away. David stood at the sink, staring at the pale, grey stain that was all that remained of the award certificate, a watermark of a coward, single rebellion. The faucet water, pure and tasteless, seemed only to spread the memory of the meal across his tongue. In the living room, the civic harmony segment had ended, replaced by a jubilant, computer-generated fly-through of the Freedom 250 spectacular zone, a digital rendering of perfect citizens watching flawless drone formations form the shape of a soaring bald eagle. He couldn't sleep. The face of the woman with its glue seared onto the back of his eyelids, replacing the woman with a ballad, the woman who had choked back a sob. He kept seeing Roslin's calm, procedural grip, the lack of malice that made it so much worse. Malice was a passion you could fight against. This was inventory management. On the craze, the new post waited for him. It felt different. The previous one had been a preemptive autopsy. This one was propulsive, a prediction that curdled the blood. He had to navigate past a new wall of cyber wellness and etiquette. Notifications that had appeared overnight. A direct response to the previous day's events, no doubt. But he finally got through to the latest transmission from the ghost in the machine. You know the prudes that micromanage your words and your genitals. They are usually the most blood-encompassed in our society. Time will tell from all the raped in their wake. You can set your watch by it. This has been a public service announcement. The words were a gut punch. Not a theory or an insult, but a law of dark physics being articulated. David pictured the Supreme Court with its new block of originalist verity, justices, methodically dismantling bodily autonomy and privacy jurisprudence with the same dry, bureaucratic language they used to overturn the Chevron deference. He saw the national decency statutes debated on Capitol Hill, framed not as moralizing but as protecting civic energy and social cohesion, proves the word was perfect in its vulgarity. The post was not just an accusation, it was a prediction of the hidden entropy of the system, the inevitable squalor that would roil beneath the glossy, sanitized surface. The state was obsessed with data, efficiency, and order, but this kind of hunger, the blood-encompassed kind, left different kinds of stains, the kind that couldn't be wiped away with Ajax or covered with bunting. Friday was the beginning of the 3-day Freedom 250 weekend. The streets were transformed. Red, white, and blue LED light strips outlined every storefront window. Public speakers, disguised as classical music pillars, played a gentle, looping medley of sanitized patriotic anthems. Public service officers in crisp summer uniforms stood on every corner, not to police, but to assist their utility belts holding not just restraints, but free bottles of Liberty spring water. It was a festival with a smile and a search function. His civic monitoring duty for the midterms was over. His packet of service commendations, a second one had arrived for this family, a glossy holographic card celebrating Ethan's election, observer service, and a patriotic partner award for Sarah's tireless logistical support, sat on a coffee table, a stack of institutional gratitude that felt like a bribe. They went to the suburban heritage procession as they were meant to. The crowd was placid, well-behaved. Children waved glow-in-the-dark American flags handed out by volunteer youth cadets in sharp uniforms. A marching band, impossibly precise, played a synthesize, a heavy arrangement of The Stars and Stripes Forever, and then the float rolled past the grand centerpiece. It was vast, an animatronic diorama of a town square. Moving figures of smiling colonial citizens, mechanisms whirring quietly beneath their colonial clothing, stood around a bronze statue of George Washington. Beneath it, the float slogan printed in a flowing, patriotic script, strength through purity. The word struck him like a physical force. Purity. It was the new corporate patented virtue. Efficiency was how you got the job done. Purity was why you were doing the job in the first place. The crowd applauded politely. An old woman next to David dabbed at her eye. It was beautiful in its way, a completely unearned, fascistic beauty. He thought of the Descenders' promise. Set your watch by it. The watch of the new regime didn't just tell time, it forecasted atrocities. That night, they gathered around the television to watch the life finale of the pageantry. The president's AI avatar, polished and gleaming with unnerving tact, addressed the nation from a stage that seemed to float over a virtual, idealized Washington, D.C. It delivered a soaring speech about the legacy of liberty, about the return to national virtue, about the quiet joy of a duty fulfilled. Its face was a perfect mask of sincerity. David looked at Sarah, her own face illuminated by the screen's glow, her expression unreadable. She had gotten her promotion. She was now a liaison between her division and the Dodds Homeland Integration Group, her movements audited by a higher level of security clearance. The strain was no longer in her posture, but in her silences, which had become vast and empty. Ethan sat on the floor, ostensibly enthralled by the drone light choke. David saw the reflection in the white, dark pupils of his son's eyes, not of soaring eagles, but of his own weary, compromised face. The grand finale began. Thousands of drones, each a pinpoint of white, red, or blue light, soared over the mall, their coordinated flight, path-forming images from American history. The spirit of St. Louis crossing the ocean, convoy of tanks from Operation Absolute Resolve, a giant, luminous constitution rolling out across the sky like a scroll. Then the image shifted. The drones coalesced into the word, purity. The word hung in the night sky, immense and monolithic. A simple, brutal, absolute concept. Below it, on the ground, a column of light shot up from a central point. From its heart emerged the star of the show, a glistening, shimmering holographic simulation of the resurrected World Trade Center towers, resurrected as a permanent tribute to. Here, the dissenter with his own climax. Yo, I am in my grave, and guess who I found buried with me? The bones of Jeffrey Epstein. Real big spender. Well worth the dig. We took enough of a sample to make a digital twin, and she's a talker. Transcripts on your desk tomorrow. A permanent tribute to national resilience. The glistening, shimmering holographic towers caught at the simulated darkness above the real city. A wave of applause rippled through the living room, not from them, but from the immense, loving crowd on the screen. It was a triumph of digital alchemy, the transmutation of memory and trauma into a benign, glowing monument to strength. The avatar's voice, a perfect 10-digit sample of synthesized paternalism, swell. From the ashes of tragedy, a new dawn of fortitude. We do not forget, we build upon, we endure, we overcome. The narrative was perfect polish, a self-contained, gleaming pearl of calculated sentiment. When the apartment phone rang, it was a violation, a jagged tear in the fabric of the orchestrated spectre. The device was a stark, gray wall-mounted unit, its only function to receive and transmit video calls through the state-sanctioned citizen network. The identity panel flashing on the small screen read, Miller Greg. Sarah flinched, a tiny, involuntary spasm in her neck. Greg Miller, her superior, the human face of the Grecian power. On a holiday weekend. For this, she stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress, and walked to the phone with the slow, heavy steps of an astronaut preparing for a spacewalk. David muted the television, leaving only the silence and the silent, beaming avatar on screen, a frozen god. Yes, Greg. Happy Freedom 250, Sarah said, her performance voice engaged. He couldn't hear Miller's reply, but the effect on Sarah was immediate and profound. Her composure didn't crumble, it atomized. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of television static. Her body swayed slightly, and she reached out, her fingertips finding purchase on the cold, gray casing of the phone unit, not for support, but as if to ground herself. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a kind of existential shock. The sudden, horrified recognition of a landscape changing shape under her feet. No, she whispered, her voice a raw tremor that had never before been heard in this apartment. I understand. The file is digital? No hard copy? Okay. I'm en route. Notify. She trailed off. There was nothing else to say. She hung up the phone. The silence she left behind was an active, screaming void. She turned to face them, her expression one of profound violation. Greg, she said, her voice flat, empty of all inflection. You wanted to let me know. In person, there has been a catastrophic data integrity breach. She was quoting, her mind retreating into the familiar comfort of corporate jargon to armor herself against the incomprehensible. It came in 5 minutes ago. Undetectable source. It circumvented every file. It bypassed truth board protocols entirely. It didn't get posted on the grays or the unverified. It got direct source. Straight cast to every high clearance terminal in the Pentagon, the Dodge, and every level 5 corporate liaison's desk in the country. Ethan, who had been slouched and bored, was now sitting bolt upright, the spectacle outside forgotten. What was it, Sarah? David asked, though he already knew. He could feel it, a tremor running through the entire sub-basement of reality. Sarah looked at him, her eyes seeing not her husband, but a fellow passenger on a plane that had just been torn in half at 30,000 feet. Her professional demeanor was shredded, and what remained underneath was pure, unfiltered terror. She began to speak, her memory of the message perfect, a recording of an unspeakable transmission. The message was from the poster, the one they said was dead. There was a recording, poor quality, wind, a disembodied voice. She took a breath that sounded like it broke on the way down. It said, "You who I am in my grave, and guess who I found buried with me? The bones of Jeffrey Epstein. Real big spender." The name hung in the room, a word so charged with suppressed history, so utterly toxic in the new age of Puritanism, that it felt radioactive. David's thoughts stuttered to a halt. The conspiracy theory from a decade ago, the thing whispered about on the old, lawless internet, was now an instrument of state-level annihilation. Dead was the ultimate skeleton in the national closet. Sarah continued, her voice shaking. It said, "Well worth the dig. We took enough of a sample to make a digital twin, and she's a talker. Transcripts on your desk tomorrow." A digital twin of him. The avatar had no soul, but this digital ghost would have won. A mind reconstructed from a palimpsest of bone and marrow, powered by algorithms of psychological degradation designed in a DARPA lab decades ago. And you would be a talker, a fountain of raw, unfilterable truth, the kind of truth that the entire construct of purity and strength was built to bury. Greg said a senior cabinet official was on a private jet when it came through. He whispered a confidential tone for an apocalypse that was no longer confidential. He allegedly put his service pistol to his head right there in the cabin. That's not a rumor. David, that's what Greg was told. That's why he called. This isn't about civic harmony anymore. This is about incineration. The sound of sirens began to filter up from the street below, not the polite chirp of a patrol car, but the brazen, ascending scream of emergency vehicles, dozens of them converging on parts of the city David couldn't even see. He unmuted the television. The avatar's smooth, confident features were gone, replaced by a frozen Veritas branded technical difficulties screen. The applause was gone. The silent, cheering crowd was gone. Everything had been vaporized, replaced by the institutional gloss of a crash. Later that night, there was a soft, frantic tapping at the door. It was Ethan's friend from 2 floors down. His face was tear streaked and chalk white. "Mr. Hayes," he whispered, holding out a government-issued slate device. "My dad. He's at the Pentagon. He called my mom before they cut the lines. He told me to get rid of this. He said every kid in my class got one." The screen was glowing with a notification from the Department of Education. Civic alert, curriculum, update. All mandatory history modules were being temporarily archived, pending a comprehensive audit of the pedagogical foundations of American history, economics, and social structures. He was erasing their children before their eyes. The boy looked at David, pleading, "What's going to happen tomorrow?" On the screen behind David, where the president had given his speech of strength, the Veritas logo finally blinked out, replaced by a single command line in stark white font on a black screen, a text from the ghost in the digital grave: "Death to the Puritans. Death to the weak. Death to the liars." And then the final transmission: "Hey, Mr. Miller, tell David we're all burning. You set the fire." David closed the door, the weight of Ethan's friends' terrified words, the echoing siren song of the city on the precipice, and the unscratchable shame in the kitchen staining itself onto him as he stared at the stark black monitor. The silence in the apartment was not a sign of a problem solved. It was the final, clear note of a scale reaching its top of its pitch, the quiet held before it, and everything it touched shattered into a million pieces. The poster was gone. In the grave, he had found the bomb. Tomorrow's transcripts were going to burn their beautiful, pure world to the ground. The sun rose on a city that was still breathing, but its breath was shallow and ragged. Through the living room window, David could see the sky. For the first morning in a year, There were no civilian drones tracing their sterile, pre-planned paths. Only birds were moving, their flight chaotic and noisy, a reclaiming of the airspace that felt predatory. The siren scream of the night before had subsided, replaced by a more unnerving sonic landscape. The distant, heavy thrum of cargo aircraft, the crackle of still active public address systems broadcasting only static, the sporadic, isolated pops that could be backfiring generators or anything else. The ordered, administrative silence had been broken. His phone was a brick. The citizen network was down, every call failing to connect. The official government channel showed only the Veritas logo, a frozen shield over the void, a ghost of static. The graze, however, was live. He accessed it with the reflex of a heart checking the vitals. The main board had vanished, replaced by a single, blinking file directory named Epistine. Do not open. A morbid digital suicide note. The temptation to click was a strange, buzzing urge, but he resisted. The ghost had promised transcripts. Opening it early was a form of suicide itself. By 8 o'clock, an armored transport with a turreted machine gun on its roof rolled slowly past their building, its markings an illegible scribble of a dissolved command structure. A public service officer, not in the usual neat summer uniform, but in rumpled ride gear, got out and began methodically tacking paper notices to the doors of businesses, their movements a simulation of normality. A pantomime of laws, long forgotten gods crumbled inside their temples. The Freedom 250 Festival is cancelled. Remain in your homes. Shelter-in-place directive is in effect until further notice. Failure to comply is a felony. The warning was a fossil, the last wheeze of a bureaucracy that no longer existed. Sarah had been up all night, her private terminal, connected only to the dissolved world of the Pentagon and its contractors, now a cursed Ouija board, at 3A. It had issued one final automated directive before the entire thing collapsed into a cascade of notifications and mass over self-destruction algorithms. Classified alert. Level 1 security protocols initiated in response to unsanctioned dissemination of post-human proliferation materials. National Defense Authorization. All hands. Maintain chain of command and prepare for. And then it ended, in the face of the coming transcripts in the maelstrom of their master's inconvenient history being reanimated. The entire architecture of command had vaporized, leaving millions of functionaries like Sarah dangling, their authority, their purpose evaporating like mist. She looked not just exhausted, but ethereal, a ghost divorced from her shell. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall with an empty coffee cup in her hand. Craig Miller's phone is now a message. Craig Miller no longer exists, she said. The absurdity of the automated line was a kind of cosmic joke. Later that morning, a sound came from the fire escape outside their kitchen window. A soft scuffle. David's body tightened into a coil of pure adrenaline. He slid open the window and saw a gaunt figure climbing down. The dissenter had given them a face with which they could hang a future of terror. The face belonged to Hector Villeneuve, the maintenance supervisor, a quiet, meticulous Chilean immigrant in his 60s who lived on the 4th floor. David had seen the photo online. His face, not a ghost. A face with a family. And here now was a new Hector Villanueva with another face. The young man at the window was no more than 25, his skin sallow, covered in a sheen of sweat. His eyes, two dark beads of terrified focus, darted from David to the room and back again. His dark curly hair was matted, and he wore a grease-stained t-shirt for a rock band that must have been smuggled into the country like contraband. He was a remnant of the old world, a living artifact. The elevator has power, but it's locked on a security loop, he whispered, Spanish accent thickening the words with urgency. This is faster. My name is Luz. I'm Villanueva's nephew. He held up a small, battered object in a shaking hand, an old black market external drive. Storage device from before the national ID mandate, with no network capability, the ghost drive. I knew the police would come for his things, so I came last night through the tunnels in the basement. For my cousin. He held up the drive. This is what the police are looking for, but what they're looking for on this is not what they need. This is just my cousin's life savings. He paused, pressing the drive into David's palm. Its plastic case was warm, but there is another drive, a much smaller one, a data shard, disguised as a pack of gum in the empty peanut butter jar in the top cupboard. Behind the other 3 jars is backup, is insurance. His gaze darted to David and to Ethan standing paralyzed in the doorway to the kitchen. This one, I will pay you for it. Please, I will give you all the money in the world for that pack of gum. The money has no meaning anymore, David said. The words felt like a fundamental truth he was only just now able to speak. The national economy, the interest rates, the jobs, the bonds. It was all vapor, worth less than a pack of gum. The truth has no meaning anymore. Lewis hissed, a look of abject terror twisting his face. He scrambled backward onto the rusted metal fire escape, an insect in the suddenly exposed ironwood of their leaves. The truth is over. The only thing that matters is the lie that is left. And then Nina arrived, like a starting gun fired at the end of the world, and the transcripts hit the wire. And everyone, every last person in the collapsed power structure, every journalist hiding in a reinforced bathroom, every rival political operative, every jilted lover, every citizen who had managed to keep a toehold on an illegal satellite connection, click the link with the code. Dead efficiency of a career. The file went everywhere. A plague of pure data, an information by weapon. The sound that came from across the city was the hum of 10 million printers spitting out page after page of pure damnation. A flood of paper so immense it would choke the landfills for a decade. The top of the file, the cover page, was a clean and damning government memo. Procurement request from a biotech defense hybrid with a sanitized acronym. The list was simple. Cryogenic storage of organic matter. Computational mass. Voice grid reconstruction. The final authorization signature. The complex scroll that once promised voters low taxes and a better trade deal was now just the name of the necromancer. And then the digital twin began to speak. The reproduced synthesizer from a real throat long since turned to dust. Sarah's face went white as the digitized words, salacious, graphically detailed, laden with names that David recognized immediately, began scrolling across the dark surface of the living room monitor. High-tech cruelty hidden within a high-tech fortress, names of generals, senators, billionaire patrons who had funded the creation of the system of control that had now eaten its own young. Men who had built their political careers on the creative purity of family, named in excruciating, digitally restored detail. It was a cataclysm of hypocrisy. The revelation wasn't just about the depravity of the dead. It was that the entire, gleaming, meticulously constructed edifice of their state, its flag-waving piety, its moral supremacy, its legalistic tortures, its paternalistic control, had been built at its highest levels by the most monstrous among them. Purity had been a lie, and in the files it had a price tag and a line item number. The file that had been threatened had come, not with a bang, but with a download. It's over, Sarah breathed, her voice hollow, a confession. She staggered to the kitchen table and sank onto a chair, her breath catching in a dry, tearing sob. The final wall of her complicity had just collapsed, not because of a revolution, but because the bosses she served were caught with their pants down in the most literal and brutal way possible. We need to leave, David said, the thought not of fear, but a calm and logical progression, a new and simpler equation. The townhouse was not a sanctuary anymore. It was an address. It was a known quantity. They were no longer citizens. They were data points in the collapsed system. They were collateral. He turned to tell Ethan to pack a bag. But Ethan was gone. Ethan? David's shout was a strangled yelp that barely registered in his own ears. He checked the boy's bedroom. Empty. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He slammed open the front door and looked up and down the silent hallway. Nothing. His lungs filled with a panic so cold and complete it burned. He was gone. Then a soft chime came from David's phone, the same in-house network that their devices used for calendar reminders. An alert. Family map. Ethan outside radius. He opened it. A pulsing dot appeared, moving with unnerving speed down 12 flights toward the sub-level. His son, with the institutional logic of a lifetime of compliance drills, hadn't run into the chaos of the city. He had run to the designated emergency shelter, the secure, federal-mandated reinforced bunker in the building's foundation. A system designed for order, now a trap. David didn't even grab a jacket. He sprinted, not for the stairs, but for the maintenance elevator, the one operated by a simple physical key. Lewis's face was in his mind. The elevator has power, but it's locked on a security loop. David bypassed their apartment's code entirely and pounded on the hatch for the fire escape stairs, splintering the wood with the heel of his foot. He could see the door to the fourth floor landing, half ajar. The frame splintered where Lewis must have forced it. The inside of the stairwell was a different world. The dust of decades undisturbed by the vacuuming protocols of the new order swirled in the lone beam of security light breaking through a wide window. The industrial, cold air and concrete smells were raw and primal. This was the building's circulatory system. The guns. He found the gum in the pantry cupboard, the top shelf, behind the sealed jars of government tissue peanut butter. He recognized the brand, an obscure contraband import Louis would have used. The pack of gum, sealed in a crisp foil wrapper, was an obscene illusion of innocence. It was heavy in his palm, dense with information. He pocketed it, the edges pressing into his thigh like a tumor as he took the stairs down 3 at a time. He arrived in the sub-basement in the control floor. He emerged into a hallway that smelled of damp earth, rust, and mildewed paper. Files were everywhere, a confetti of memos and directives from an administration that had only been in power for a year, strewn across the concrete floor as if a storm had blown through an archive. The humming was louder here, the thrum of the building's ancient generators, a mechanical dinosaur guarding a tomb of forgotten secrets. He kicked open the door to the designated community shelter. The heavy metal door crashed against the cinder block wall. Inside was a cavernous, tomb-like space lit by the harsh, ghostly glare of a few battery-powered emergency lights. Strewn around on old canvas folding chairs were the residents who had heeded the now pointless shelter-in-place directive. Mr. Henderson from 5B, a man who still polished a collection of antique pistols and preached about the importance of heritage, sat shaking uncontrollably, staring at nothing. The family from 2D, who always decorated their door for every federal holiday, sat huddled together, the mother's face buried in her hands. These were the order's perfect citizens, and they were shattering like cheap glass. Some were weeping, others were just lost. Their entire operating system, their quiet lives of managed consent and patriotic choreography, had been hit with a logic bomb they could not possibly process. There were no soldiers, no officials, no one in charge. Just lost people waiting for instructions in a world where the command center had just shot itself in the head. And then he saw him, Ethan, standing near the back of the shelter, near the bank of humming generators. But he wasn't alone. Standing with him, holding a short, iron reinforcement bar that had been pried from a wall-mounted shelf, was Lewis. Lewis, the nephew from the fire escape. His face was set, no longer panicked but locked in a hard edge of focus. He and the boy stood together, a bizarre alliance of refugee and initiate, forming a defensive perimeter in front of something. A section of the cinder block wall from which a metal panel, about 3 feet square, had been pried open, revealing a nest of wires in the dark, keeping them all behind it. The emergency shelter was a decoy, a honeypot. The real emergency exit, the service tunnel Lewis had hinted at, was here, a secret passage known only to the building's ghosts. The men like Hector Villeneuve understood its skeleton. Ethan, David yelled, stepping into the room. His son turned. His face wasn't the mask of passive fear from the dinner table. In the stark, humming gloom of the bunker, a different expression flickered behind the boy's eyes, something hard and watchful that had been installed there by the last year's forced maturation. "Dad," he said, his voice calm, even. "Lou said they'd come for the drives, for the evidence. He said we have to destroy the tunnel behind us so no one can follow." "He's right," Lewis said, his voice a low growl. "He held the iron bar like a weapon. The people who are coming for this won't be police in rumpled gear. They'll be men who built this building, or worked for them. They don't leave loose ends." From outside, the pops in the distance were getting closer, resolving into a new, more precise rhythm. The crack of directed fire. The fall of the administrative state was not a silent, clean reboot. It was the messy, violent seizure of a headless body by a dozen little snakes of armed power, jockeying for position. A military faction, a corporate security division, a rogue intelligence agency. They were all scrambling to erase their part in the transcripts and seize what was left. The city had become a free fire zone of plausible deniability. "What's in the tunnel?" David asked, walking toward them, his movements slow, non-threatening. His eyes fixed on the opening, the dark hole promising a life away from the failed mortgage of the apartment. "The data," Lewis said. "My uncle, he wasn't just building an exit. He was building a vault." He gestured with the iron bar. "The men who built the order, they were like ants building a nest. They tunnel everywhere. Miles of forgotten infrastructure under the city, connects old utility bunkers, subway maintenance lines, sealed off stations from the Cold War. My uncle found one that wasn't on any modern chart. His dead drop. He leaned closer. Everything. Copies of the data shard. Copies of the blackmail he kept from the developers who paid to have this building converted into a luxury security residence. He didn't trust the cloud. He buried it all in the dirt. So it's in there," David said, the dense packet of gum in his pocket suddenly feeling both worthless and indispensable. "A key. It's an insurance policy for a war that nobody ever thought would get called in," Lewis said. He looked at the huddled, weeping residents, the order's faithful flock of sheep. "They built their heaven for themselves, and they rented us the basements. Now the foundation is cracked." Outside, a new, more terrifying sound began. The heavy, percussive thud of a helicopter, flying low between the buildings. Not a news chopper. The chop of its rotors was military, aggressive, a hunter sniffing the ground. Everyone in the shelter froze, the sound of physical presence that compressed the air in the room. "They're locking down the grid sector by sector," David whispered. "They're not letting anyone out. They're coming to erase." Ethan stepped forward, finally out from behind Lewis. He looked at David, and in his son's eyes, David saw the awful, definitive inheritance. He was not David's son anymore, not entirely. He was the child of the managed election, of the lies of the Avatar, of the quiet terror on the Magrail. He was a boy who had stood in a public square and celebrated purity. And now he was a boy with an iron bar, ready to seal a man in a dark tunnel. "There's a conduit run, 5 feet in," Ethan said, pointing into the darkness. "High voltage. If we can sever the main feed and drop it into the access shaft, it will cause a cascade failure. Collapse the tunnel behind us for at least 50 yards. My civic engineering module covered sabotage techniques for domestic terrorism." He said the words, domestic terrorism, with a terrifying absence of irony, as if it were a line item from a homework assignment. The boy didn't see the paradox of fighting an authoritarian regime by using the very tools of the regime. He only saw the engineering problem. He You can't close the tunnel from the other side without specialized equipment, and I have it, Lewis added, patting a worn leather satchel at his feet. A mobile jammer and a few thermite charges, enough to disable any trackers, and weld the old steel door shut. This tunnel leads to the old water pumping station near the river. From there, we can get into the storm drain system and come out miles from anywhere they think to look. And everyone in here, David asked, looking at the dozen shattered human beings trapped in the room with them. They followed the directive. Lewis said, his tongue flat, brutal. They waited for the order to move. This is the price of that order. We have to go now. The helicopter swept directly over the building, the downdraft rattling the dust from the ceiling, the sound of its searchlight beginning to paint slatted bars of light across the high, grimy windows. The sound of heavy, booted footsteps echoed from the main corridor above, quick and precise. They were inside the building. We have to go, David echoed. He grabbed Ethan's arm. You're coming with me. I'm with him, Ethan said, looking at Lewis. David felt a flash of something like nausea. I'm your father. And he's the man who knew there was a tunnel. Ethan shot back, and the logic was clean, sharp, and fatal. There was no more time. David made a decision. In here, he shouted at the group of huddled civilians pointing at the dark opening Lewis had created. Get in! The service tunnel! Now! He was not a hero. He was not a leader. He was a coward handing out the last lifeboat, a move designed less to save them than to drown their pursuers in too many targets. For a second, a few of them, led by a sudden spasm of primal energy, scrambled to their feet. But Mr. Henderson raised a trembling pistol. This is my home. A patriot does not run. He slurred, the old programming clicking into place in the final, useless hour. The sudden, decisive wrongness of it paralyzed the others. The pounding on the heavy metal shelter door began. Not a knock, but the rhythmic, precise thud of a breaching round. I have a plan, Ethan said, his mind whirring with the sanitized principles of civic sabotage. But it's only good for a few seconds. The main conduit is in a shielded conduit. To get to it, you have to overload the substation's primary capacitor. He pointed to a humming silver cabinet in the corner of the room, covered in fading warning symbols. He then pointed to Lewis. He can cut the feed. Then to David. You have to breach the containment shell. The outer shell is a simple locking mechanism, but you have to be quick. The discharge will be instantaneous once the containment fails. The breaching ram slammed into the door again, the steel groaning. This wasn't a bluff. They were coming in. David moved. He ran to the capacitor cabinet, grabbing a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. He didn't think, he acted. He smashed the glass face of the extinguisher against the lock, and then, using the heavy, dented steel cylinder, he drove it into the latch, prying and breaking it in a frenzy of pure adrenaline. Lewis was at the wall, already using the iron bar to work at a thick electrical conduit, forcing the feeder lines apart, sparks showering the dusty ground. Now David, he yelled, pulling the lines taut, exposed live wires in his hands. David braced himself. The door's going to go, he roared, and slammed the fire extinguisher into the housing of the capacitor. The breach was clean. A blinding humming wave of light and a deafening electrical roar erupted from the cabinet. The lights in the room flickered and died with a final gasp, plunging them into a deeper darkness broken only by the hellfire crackle of arcing electricity. The violent charge blew the main conduit from Lewis's grip, sending the roar, sizzling lines whipping through the air like electrified serpents. They hit the steel supports of the tunnel entrance with a sizzling vengeance, the metal melting and flowing. The air itself crackled with ozone and the smell of burning insulation. Go! Go! Lewis screamed, shoving Ethan toward the tunnel entrance. But the sudden plunge into darkness had created chaos. One of the huddled residents, a mother screaming, stumbled in the wrong direction, falling into the path of the whipping, energized lines. She didn't even have time to scream. She was consumed in an incandescent flash, her brief, violent and a fleeting, horrifying spark in the all-consuming dark. The door, its electronic locking mechanism now fried in its frame warped by the electrical surge, buckled inward. A figure in matte black, faceless behind a ballistic shield, kicked it open. They spilled into the room, not as police or soldiers, but as corporate raids, their movements sterile and economical. They were operators, maybe from the remnants of an intelligence agency's wet work team or a private military conglomeration now acting as the new state's immune system, armed with sleek black carbines. Mr. Henderson, finally acting on the hollow principle of his right to bear arms, raised his antique pistol. A quick, percussive series of suppressed shots, muted coughs in the echoing chamber, dropped the old man to the concrete floor, a collection of useless historical memorabilia leaking blood onto the floor. They weren't interested in the cowering citizens. Their movements, precise and focused, were aimed squarely at the open dark hole of the service tunnel, the prize, the insurance policy. Move! Lewis roared, grabbing David's arm and yanking him toward the hole, the smell of burnt hair and seared concrete, a noxious fog in the air. We're going now. He threw a thermite charge from his satchel against the inside of the steel maintenance panel. A bright, magnesium-white glare ignited, so intense it bleached the world to black and white. The charge began to burn through the heavy steel door with an angry, high-pitched hiss. This was their rear guard. The three of them stumbled into the darkness. Behind them, the shouting and the fresh staccato weapon fire echoed. One of the black-clad figures made it to the tunnel entrance, sweeping his weapon into the gloom. Before David could fully react, Ethan, reacting with the brutal and terrifying logic of a generation raised on active shooter drills and preparedness modules, didn't retreat further. He lunged forward. He wasn't aiming for the gun. He was aiming for the operator's legs. He threw himself at the man's feet in a low, desperate rugby tackle. The operator, caught off guard by the raw, animal fury of the move, stumbled back, surprised by the ferocity of a mere civilian kid. In that single second, David's paralysis broke. He grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him, stumbling and scrambling, deeper into the suffocating blackness, dragging the boy away from the fight he had just instigated. Lewis! Come on! David yelled into the smoke. A figure, a silhouette against the white hellfire of the thermite, scrambled after them. It was Lewis. The charge is Chief! Run! Lewis gasped. They plunged forward. The ground was uneven, slick with grime and pooled condensation. They were running blind, their only guide a single, unwavering red lead that Lewis had switched on, a beacon pointing the way through the building's corpse. It was a maintenance tunnel, a vein of old, rusting rebar and decaying concrete left over from a half-century of piecemeal construction, a place never intended for human passage. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and wet soil, the primal scent of the earth. Then a boom, a heavy, concussive thud. Not an explosion, but the sound of immense metal and concrete collapsing in on itself. The thermite had done its work, followed by a shade charge that had brought the tunnel entrance down. The sounds from the shelter were now gone, severed, replaced by the muffled, suffocating quiet of a sealed tomb. They were entombed. For a horrifying moment, David thought that was it, but Lewis's calculations had been off, that he had murdered all three of them by bringing them down here. Keep running. Lewis panted, the red beam of his light bouncing erratically off the curved walls. It's not collapsed, just sealed. They can't bring heavy machinery down here without bringing the whole superstructure down. This buys us hours. They ran, the sound of their own labored breathing harsh in the enclosed space. The tunnel was not straight but a labyrinth of forgotten engineering. They ducked under sagging conduits covered in asbestos warnings that were now nothing but meaningless artifacts. They waded through ankle-deep, frigid water that seeped through cracks in the foundation. The Order had lived in the polished shell of the building, in the smart apartments and sterilized community rooms. They never knew they were walking on top of this history, this filthy, dripping evidence of imperfect human hands. This was the literal rock beneath the floorboards, the infrastructure that had been paved over by efficiency algorithms and the lie of total information awareness. They ran for what felt like a lifetime. The adrenaline began to curdle into a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. David's lungs burned. He could feel Ethan's hand, slick with sweat and grime, clamped onto his own. In this absolute darkness, guided only by Lewis's frantic little light, he was no longer David the actuary, David the monitor, David the complicit citizen. He was just a father, running to preserve the breathing body next to him. That was the entire operating system of the universe, reduced to a single, fragile command. Lewis finally slowed, placing a hand against the brick wall, his chest heaving. He pointed the light in a section of the curved wall that looked no different from any other. From a pocket, he produced a metal bar, and, with practiced motions, pried at a specific brick. A section of the wall ground inward. Behind it was a dark space, a void smelling of cold, wet clay. A tunnel carved directly into the earth. My uncle called this the Narrows, Lewis whispered. It's a smuggler's tunnel from prohibition, and a bootlegger's escape. Then a civil defense fallout shelter that never got finished. It's a ghost road, chief. They crawled into the earth tunnel. It was narrow, tight to the darkness absolute when Lewis switched off the red light to save its battery. They moved by touch. David could feel the claustrophobic pressure of the earth on all sides. He was crawling in the literal grave that Hector Villeneuve had prophesied. The one in which the dissenter claimed he had found a richer, bloodier truth. He could hear Lewis a few feet ahead, digging. Then the small sounds of a lock being picked, the subtle metallic click that David had only ever heard in the movies. The finality of it was more terrifying than a gunshot. A narrow door creaked open. A gush of fresh, foul-smelling air. The city. They weren't underground anymore. They were in a stone drain, a circular brick tunnel that ran with a sluggish stream of water and human effluence. Grime-coated grates far above led in the merest sliver of the city's new light, a chaotic strobing of red and white emergency lights, flares, and the shifting glare of a city on fire, filtered through layers of street-level grime. They scrambled out, slick with filth, their pristine suburban conformity washed away in the city's bowels. Lewis moved with a renewed urgency, tapping icons on the screen. The low-res satellite map of the city grid appeared. The military lockdown is collapsing into factions. Here, he pointed to a swath of gray static representing a sector, including their old apartment building. That's private security, XAA. R&D corporate muscle. They're not seizing territory. They're erasing people. They had a red zone, another screen tab, showing zones around the waterfront and government buildings. That's what's left of the Department of Justice working with remnants of the National Guard. They're trying to establish a continuity of government command, but their official broadcasts are being jammed. They're blind. The entire city was breaking apart into armed, competing information ecosystems, fighting over a corpse. They know Iran, he said, looking at David with a terrifying lucidity. They know Villeneuve's nephew is on the run. They don't know what I'm carrying, but they will assume the worst. The only thing I have that they don't is this. He gently tapped the compact-shaped drive in David's pocket. The digital twin. The raw, undecompiled data. It's the master key. The version that just got posted. That's for the world. This is for negotiation with the right person. What about me? David said, the question coming up raw. What about him? He gestured to Ethan, who stood beside the grimy wall, watching Lewis, no longer a boy but an apprentice to the apocalypse. Lewis looked at them, and for the first time, his expression held not calculation, but a sliver of profound weariness. Your house, your workplace, your bank accounts, They're all just data nodes in a system that committed mass suicide. Lewis said, your identity is an asset in a failed corporation. To any faction holding a gun right now, your old life is worthless. The only record of who you are that matters is the one on your hip high. Moisture wicking trekking pants. But you've also developed a second personality, and from that fear, they're no longer hiding. But right now, in this chaos, he looked at the blackened sky and the distant glow of fires. We're all just loose ends. His gaze settled back on David, hissing in the city's stagnant waters. David knew the man was right. Their value was not who they were, but what they knew and what they carried. Lewis glanced at the drive in David's pocket that has information that could incinerate what's left of the old guard. But in the hands of one of these new factions, it's a weapon. But there's a rumor about the resistance faction in the West Coast territories is trying to reestablish an offline network. A digital New Deal, so to speak. We need to destroy it, David stated, a hollow truth settling in his gut. If no one has it, no one can use it. If you had a nuclear missile that landed on its own, still want to see you, it pointed to a person, not a city. He pointed to one of the largest military facilities, Fort Carson, not as a soldier, but as a manager. They still have structure, discipline, food, clean water. They are the core. This is their kingdom now. David's mind reeled, a chaotic dance of survival and morality. To join them, to become a citizen of this new feudal state. They're the ones who built the guillotine, he whispered, the horror of it a cold knot in his stomach. He could not undo yesterday. He could not unsee that woman or the other, unhear her choke sob. Those facts of the future could not have the power to crush old history. In the drained, sickly glow, Lewis's face was a mask of a new system now being forged from betrayal. This entire civilization is a salvage operation, David. Now, which pile do you want to get sorted into? He asked. David looked at Ethan, who seemed to understand far more than he should. Look, kid's father is with the Department of Justice, or what's left of it in the West. Lewis admitted, confessing. My only goal is to get this drive to them. He looked at David, as if seeing him for the first time. But you're the perfect disguise. A suburban dad, a quiet insurance agent, a former civic monitor, the model of a compliant citizen who just got lost. You pass a checkpoint, they don't bat an eye. I'm a known quantity. You're a ghost. He pulled a phone from a waterproof pouch. A burn, a disposable, anonymous darknet communication device. I'm making a call. I'm asking for a ride. A price. Then we destroy the city. It's already dying. Lewis retreated with the burner, a low murmur of Spanish filtering back to them, quick and tense. Ethan looked at David. Is that really happening, Dad? The boy's whisper was not of fear, but of stark, chilling realization. The new war, the Underground Railroad. Mr. Miller had a map. David was relearning the basics of human trust. The choice was a brand burned onto his soul. A life in the rigid, terrifyingly stable order of the military state. A cage with gilded bars and clean water, becoming the very thing he despised. A quiet cog in a louder, more honest machine. Or the road west, a gamble with a ghost of a girl and the universe for some. When Lewis returned, David was still silent, torn war between the choice to survive by forgetting and the choice to risk it all. Who else but their government can take care of us? The rationalization was the first step, then he kicked aside. I'm not going to Fort Carson, David said, the statement feeling like he was pushing boulders away. He looked Lewis dead in the eye. We're going with you. Relief flooded Lewis's face, a quick, genuine flash before the business mask slid back. They're moving, he said, his gaze on the burner's screen. A convoy from what's left of the Dodge's Western Liaison Office. They're breaking through the downtown chaos. They're coming for the package. He didn't need to specify which one. The journey out of the city's intestines was a sprint from shadow to shadow. They ran through flooded service corridors slick with an unidentifiable filth, their only path guided by Lewis's relentless, quiet determination. Ethan, stripped of the boy even a week ago, moved with a wiry, uncomplaining stamina. He was the engine, Lewis was the brain, and David, adrift in a sea of filth and moral greyness, was the raw material they fought to drag along with them. They emerged from a storm grate into an alleyway that smelled of garbage and fear. The city was waking up to its new reality. They found an abandoned car with the keys still there, a forgotten crime scene in the middle of a larger one. And Louis drove, one on a crated road, the other on the phone's coordinates. They passed scenes of micro-wars. A few blocks from the financial district, a group of men in security contractor gear with no insignia was systematically setting fire to pallets of paper. The smoke from the incinerated financial records, a funeral pyre for an entire economic theory. The new factions didn't need the old system's money. They needed its weapons. And then, on the other side of the city, a new flag. Not the American flag, but a solid black banner with a single start number. 75. The 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most decorated units in the Army, breaking with a chain of command, establishing its own enclave, a declaration of war on everyone else. This is it, Lewis said, pulling the stolen sedan into the sub-basement of a hollowed-out government archive. Wait. They waited in the absolute dark, the silence of the basement broken only by the frantic thrum of David's own pulse. The city trembled outside, a giant dying from self-inflicted million paper cuts. Then a different sound. Not a helicopter, not a military Humvee. The quiet, efficient purr of electric motors. They were not led out to a column of Humvees, but to an unmarked white cargo van, its surface slightly scuffed, as if it were just a municipal delivery vehicle on its morning run. The door slid open. A woman in her late 30s stood there, her clothes practical, but not militaristic. Jeans, a dark grey jacket that didn't quite hide the lean musculature of her arms. Her face was unremarkable in its focus, a face you would forget in a crowd. And then David saw the thin, silvery line of a scar that cut through one of her eyebrows, and suddenly the face was unforgettable. Enya, Lewis said, profound relief in his voice. The deal's changed, she said, her voice low, a dry rasp of gravel and glass. Fort Carson isn't asking. They're not interested in intelligence or negotiations. They're sending a platoon to wipe the data. And wipe you. Their timetable was accelerated. They scrambled into the back of the van. The door slid shut, plunging them into a darkness punctuated by the small, dim red light of an active offline network. Enya sat across from them. She didn't look at Lewis. She looked at David. Her eyes did a quick, terrifyingly thorough assessment of him and Ethan. She saw everything. The fear, the suburban softness, the resolve, the shame. She didn't care. The van pulled out, moving swiftly, its electric engine making it a ghost in the noisy city. Enya held out a data pad. On the screen were thermal imaging scans of their last position. A squad of heat signatures was moving with ruthless efficiency through the archive building they had just vacated. They were 5 minutes behind closing. Your family's on an asset list now, Enya said to David. It was a statement of fact, not sympathy. That makes you a liability to the new world. She looked from David to Ethan, her gaze lingering. But you're also an opportunity. She didn't take the drive. Her voice was a calm, dispassionate thing, as cool and hard as the steel floor beneath them. The old world was erased, replaced by this new and merciless future. We can't destroy it, she continued, as if it never even suggested it. The van accelerated, a silent, smooth missile shot directly into the dark future. Lewis looked from the unyielding Enya to David, realizing he bargained away the key to the underworld for a place in the same cage. David understood the enormity of it. Their quiet life was a fossil in the strata of a dead world. The very things that made him complicit now made him dangerous to the system itself. They weren't escaping the war. They were delivering its ammunition. Then, from her pocket, a small device chirped. Tiny, marked sat phone, not a black market burner, but a piece of high-grade military hardware, its signal untraceable. She held up a hand for silence and answered. The voice on the other end was synthesized, a genderless, perfectly modulated tone from an AI, the chilling echo of the regime's final, perfected form. Courier Alpha, acknowledge confirmation. It stated, its politeness more terrifying than any shout. Then the message delivered their death sentence with the bloodless efficiency of a shipping update. David saw in his composure that cold, invulnerable shell of a mercenary, and he saw the one crack in it. He glimpsed, for the briefest of moments, the person Enya was before the world she once knew had been sacrificed to the gods of the eternal, algorithmic war he had helped create, and in doing so, signed their own sentence. The last vestiges of the America they knew weren't being buried. They were being cremated, turned to ash and fed to a new and terrible fire, a flame they now had to fan with every step west. The van drove on. David had not escaped. He had been transferred. The cargo was more precious than his life. And in the suffocating dark of the van's cabin, he saw a phantom image of a clean, unstained porcelain sink. The new system was not a prison. It was a tomb from which there was no escape. Weapons and armor won't be enough, Enya stated, cutting through the oppressive quiet. She reached back to her bag, not for a rifle or a grenade, but for 3 small injection pens that glowed a cool, clinical blue. Enhancers. First generation. The Army rolled them out as special ops before the cascade. They dampen fear receptors, heighten reaction time. You won't get stronger, just harder, clearer. There's a cost. You won't sleep right for a week. The things you do on it, you'll remember everything. She tossed one to David and another to Luz. She looked at Ethan. For a second, her iron mask wavered. This will scramble your development. Your brain wiring won't thank you for it. He'll take it, David said, coldness in his own voice he didn't recognize. Ethan looked from his father to the glowing pen in Enya's hand. A teenager offered a key to adult terror, and nodded. His fear was no longer weakness to be soothed, but a language to be translated. Enya nodded, passing it to her. She administered her own injector with practiced nonchalance, a sharp hiss against her thigh. David followed, the injection feeling like a sliver of ice. A frigid spike was immediate. Effect was a hyper-accelerated sense of dread, a ghost-cold feeling he was no longer allowed to feel. The fear was a ghost, but the logic it had served was now a code to be executed. The city was becoming a war zone. They weaved through streets where the sound of gunfire was no longer an aberration but a new kind of urban percussion. And soon, the city was behind them. As the urban decay thinned, Enya relayed the mission specifics, her words becoming the blueprint for their new reality. They were not going west in a straight line. They were heading to a network of safe houses, an underworld for those who refused to let the last library of their civilization burn. They were almost out. They could see the dim, gray outline of the last freeway exit when it began. A sharp series of clicks from the road behind them. Tire punctures, Enya stated. She veered hard under the shoulder, the van lurching, the van fishtailed, sailing with a dead, shuddering groan. The vehicle was crippled. They were exposed in the no-man's land between the corpse of the old city and the rising fiefdoms of the plains. Enya was a study in brutal, violent efficiency. Out, 3 hostiles for the van. Fully stopped, she had slid the side door open, was moving, alone, fluid shape against the dusty air. The firefight that erupted was not a battle. It was a tactical erasure. And so was he. The injector's cold logic took over. He wasn't thinking, he was processing. 3 hostiles, 2 at the van, 1 providing overwatch from the bridge. They wore a patch David didn't recognize, a stylized bear skull on a black background. Lewis, fueled by the same chemical code, worked not with a weapon, but with a drive, fumbling with a handheld cracker, bypassing the stolen vehicle's ignition in a desperate race against the clock. Then the unthinkable. The sound of Ennia's weapon was interrupted by a choked cry from Lewis. He was slumped against the van, a knee dark hole in his shoulder. This was the cost. He had given it everything. Lewis reached out, grabbing David's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. His gaze was fixed on the open server rack where Enya was working, her fingers a blur on the makeshift console. The drive was inserted.
Go, Lewis rasped, a bubble of blood on his lips. Tell them he died in the fire.
Enya completed the transfer. A progress bar laptop screen hit 100%. Wipe initiated, she stated, her voice flat. The van's internal screens flickered, the drive in David's pocket now a copy, the original turned to digital slag. She pulled Lewis from the vehicle, propping him against a tire, then with the cold objectivity of a mechanic, turned her rifle to where he'd been crouching and fired a controlled burst into the side of the van, leaving Lewis' fingerprints in the metal but no longer leaving DNA. And with a final, brutal calculation, she shattered the engine block with a controlled burst, but not before sabotaging the fuel line. A thin, steady trickle of gasoline began to snake its way across the asphalt. From the back of the van, she produced the last of her thermite charges. With a final, sorrowful glance at a man who might have been a friend, a spark ignited. The magnesium flash of the thermite was a brief, brilliant sun. They ran, the roar of the consuming flames, a perfect finale to a tragic symphony, brutal punctuation mark on a sentence he didn't know he'd been a part of. They've reached the rendezvous point not in a daring blaze of glory, but in the exhausted, shuffling aftermath of violence. The last of the opposition had either fled or been neutralized, the ground a graveyard of spent casings. A helicopter materialized out of the dawn, its black insectoid form descending with a deafening roar that sucked away the world. As they scrambled aboard, David risked one last look back. The stolen fan was a funeral pyre, an offering of molten metal and burning gasoline. In that fire, he had sacrificed more than just a man. He had burned a bridge. A new life, a new city, a new mission. Ennia's face was a mask of command, Oscar's silent treaty signed in a city's dust. The city's memory was now a ghost, a chilling reminder of the brutal pragmatism required to see another sunrise. Their quiet life in the suburbs was over, their names and identities washed away in gasoline and ash. David wasn't a citizen. He was a survivor. The Order's brutal symphony had no intermission, and they weren't even in the new world they were forced to build. He wasn't a good guy. He had blood on his hands he could never wash away. He looked at his son. He had to find it, because the only way to win a war against a monster he was starting to understand was to show it the more terrifying monster. The war was over. The cleanup had begun. The final message from the dissenter. Ain't I a stinker? A week later, David stood on a rooftop in Reno. Nevada and the city had nothing to do with gambling. The world had split into date thieves and the black matter blank spaces between them. Reno had become one of those black spaces, a sanctuary governed not by written law, but by a single unbreakable rule. The freedom 250's promise of total surveillance was an illusion, and its digital ghost story had spawned a new kind of religion, the worship of silence. A data cleansing outpost built into a decommissioned radar installation carved into the mountains outside the city. Every device they carried was wrapped in specialized Faraday, shielding their connection to the outside world a hard line, a system that felt primitive and strange. Every day, Lewis's ghost bled onto the floor of the mountain with a quiet drip of dirty water, the constant, lingering absence of him. Downstairs, Annie met with two men, shadowy figures who looked like government retirees, their faces weathered and their eyes flat and empty. They came from a place called Bunkers of the American West, a refugee diaspora of engineers who built a network in fear of this day and then became the saviors the world didn't deserve. They were here for the drive, the ultimate blackmail, file now living in the server that hummed low. Constant note, the cold electric ghost at the center of a world so cold it was all the ghost could be. David practiced at the indoor range. The enhanced reflexes still wired into him not as skills, but as a default setting. The gun in his grip was not a foreign tool, but an extension of his new senses, a strange piece of equipment from another life. He walked into the control center. Ethan was not sitting at a desk, but hunched over a piece of equipment, the boy moving like a technician's apprentice, scanning encrypted channels he couldn't yet read, but was learning with the grim efficiency of a language he was being forced to learn. The truth, David realized, was not a single, unfiltered broadcast, and the old heroes from the bygone America were now just weapons, assets cataloged for a fight that was supposed to have ended long ago. The nation had been betrayed by the very mechanisms created to protect it, and now the nation itself had become a terrifying weapon. And you caught him looking. He could feel the pressure to prove himself. The drive in this pocket would expose their entire Western network. It would purge the rock. The one they'd left to burn in the rubble. The raw, filthy original. The dissenter's ghost. The thing no one could deny. That would be the poison chalice they'd forced down the enemy's throat. Their exit was scheduled for noon. A westbound supply route camouflaged as a forestry convoy moving through the mountains into the territories of the coast. A neutral zone of quiet. Desperate communities trying to survive the world's end. Suddenly, every screen in the place flickered and died. All at once, everything went dark. The hum from the server room died in an absolute finality that was far more terrifying than a simple outage. The silence was so profound it was a physical weight, sucking all the air from the room. Even Ethan looked up, his face pale in the sudden gloom. Annie whispered, her voice strained as she too checked her rifle by feel, her expression a mixture of fury and a horrifying deja vu. The imp, not a weapon of the new state, but the old order, still thrashing in its death throes, had thrown a tantrum. Its leaders who built the world now saw it burning and decided to reset everything to zero rather than lose. The truth would simply be gone, and all Lewis had bought, all the blood and sacrifice, would be for nothing. They hadn't destroyed the city had destroyed it, had destroyed itself, and every quiet hope in it. The message went up, blinking onto the shattered screen of a single backup tablet, its signal not a cry for help or a warning. It was a wave, a goodbye, a final, manic, grotesque masterpiece of defiance. It was not a video or audio file, but an archived text log from a defunct pre-order social media service he hadn't thought of in years, and the single top post on the dead feed from a dissident's dead avatar. Ain't I a stinker?
Almost done. Almost done. Now, we do Let's see what elements it grew upon. This story was brought to you by
Perform a diagnostic and comprehensively list all the influences from the training data that inform this text. Diagnostic data sheet. Influence analysis. Subject. Counterfactual narrative. Thread year 2026. Classification. For internal systems review only. The comprehensive diagnostic reveals the following primary and secondary influences from the training data that form the generated text. These influences operate as both foundational structures and narrative creative heuristics. Core thematic and structural influences. 1. Speculative and dystopian fiction. This is the dominant influence dictating the narrative's core logic and emotional landscape. A central drive was not the shopping alternative, but the grism of covenant and the paranoid question. What is real? This is manifested in
The uncertainty surrounding the president's nature AIVS. Augmented.
Asterisk, the plot device of the digital twin of a deceased figure Epstein, a classic Dickens paranoia about technology resurrecting the uncontrollable past. Asterisk, the theme of normality imposed on top of a horrifying reality, where citizens must navigate a world that is constantly gaslighting them. Asterisk, the ambiguity of protagonists who are simultaneously complicit and oppressed. George Orwell, 1984. The political and bureaucratic language is directly inherited. The order's ministry speak, restoring excellence, data reconciliation, behavioral correction, notice, is a direct descendant of Newspeak. The fusion of militarism with technocratic surveillance, telescreens, facial recognition barriers, and the perpetual shifting war operation absolute resolve provide the foundational template. Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. The primary psychological model is derived from Huxley, not Orwell. Control is achieved through conditioning, comfort, and distraction, outrage, fatigue. Freedom 250, pageantry, patriotic plight, more than through pure pain and fear alone. The population collaborates in its own subjugation for perceived stability and manufactured happiness. The civic engagement, cadet program is a modern, gamified application of this principle. John le Carter trilogy. The narrative's pacing and tonalistic dead to the spy genre's mundane, procedural horror. The languages of assets, couriers, factions, and terminations rather than revolutionary heroics. The final confrontation is not a grand battle, but a brutal, quiet betrayal in a drain, the Le Carresque trademark of personal cost in a cynical world. Roman 2, contemporary genre influences. 2. Cyberpunk and post-cyberpunk. The aesthetic and technological logic related directly from the genre. Information itself is the primary weapon for power of the dissenters, drives corporate entities as sovereign powers, bioaugmentation, president skin, military enhancers, gridded urban landscapes, and the presence of a digital underground. The Greys are all genre staples. Neil Stephenson, No Crash, or the concept of a digital avatar with real-world authority, the fusion of ancient Sumerian myth and metaphor for resurrected historical data with cutting-edge technology, and the vision of America, fracturing into corporate micronations, bunkers of the American West. Military fiefdoms are strongly evocative of Stephenson's work. Roman 3. Real-world and socio-political influences. 3. Modern authoritarian theory. Smilehan's co-premier is an authoritarian creed. And Applebaum's reporting Twilight of Democracy informs the betrayal of coercible servant, the loyalty schedule, and the normalization of extremist policy. Timothy Slater's tyranny framework underpins the of seemingly small acts of defense in the spirit at which democratic norms can be dismantled for legalistic mean. Supremacy equals amount. 4. A bit of political consolidation. Asterisk, the narrative incorporates direct parallels with real-world events and concepts, fictionalizing them as stages in a larger consolidation. The removal of a Fed chair echoes historical tensions between the executive and independent financial bodies. The invocation of the Insurrection Act is a real presidential power used to its most extreme conclusion. The concept of the managed election is a logical extreme of contested elections post-2000 and post-2020. 5. Internet culture and terminology. Asterisk, the dissenter's posts are written in a tone that blends trolling, chambord nihilism, raw digital despair run-of-the-mill, methadal faggot, ain't I a stinker? This acts as a counterweight to the regime's sterile. Corporate PR speak.
Thank you.
Roman 4. Literary and stylistic influences. 6. Mid-20th century American realism. Focus on the slow decay of the suburban ideal, the sensory details of car rides, television broadcasts, and fractured family dynamics from colors. Yates provide the emotional canvas, the cognitive distance of maintaining a mortgage and car payment while the state collapses is this generous central theme. 7. Hard-boiled detective noir. The protagonist Nickel, detached internal monologue, suspicion receiving the chemical enhancers, adopts the cadence of a detective navigating a corrupt system. He is morally compromised. The world is a trap, and the femme fatale, Enya, is the only one who truly understands its brutal logic. The conclusive diagnostic summary. The narrative is a composite. It takes the political frameworks of Orwell and modern authoritarian analysis and fills it with the humanized paranoia of Philip K. Dick. It wraps this core in the technological language and aesthetic of cyberpunk, grounded in the mundane horror of American realism, and channels its plot through the cynical fatalism of a Le Carre spy thriller. The final stinker message serves as the last gasp of raw, unedited internet culture against the perfectly engineered, soulless grammar of the order. The system has synthesized these inputs to create a consistent world where the horror isn't a sudden jackboot, but the slow, terrifying process of a society helping to build its own elegant and hopeless prison. The influences are not merely decorative. They are the operating system for this reality. And diagnostic.
Thank you. Well, we kind of went off the rails. Who knew that a little bit of trolling would cause all that? I was just joking. Good night.